It's that time again. More fluorescent paints. Hi guys, Jonathan from True Raven Studios. If you're new here, welcome. Please subscribe. We have new videos every week. This week we're working on the Silent King miniature from Games Workshop. This thing is incredible and gigantic. What we're actually going to work on today is the two Triarchal Menhir, which are the floating pieces that are next to it with the really powerful gun in game. I've had a plan to start a Necron force for a while, and I wanted to make them fluorescent paints. So if you saw my testing out fluorescent paints, this is actually the reason why. And if you watched that video, you know that the brightest paints I found were the Green Stuff World fluorescent paints, which is what we're going to be using to paint this. The miniatures kind of unintentionally came out in a slight comic book style, which I'm perfectly okay with. They look pretty cool, but my goal was to make them as bright as possible. So with that in mind, I have the miniatures primed white, and let's get right into painting. So when you're using fluorescent paints, you always want to start with your brightest color because they're semi-translucent, and then work your way to dark. So along the center of this piece, we're using Fluoro Rose, which is Green Stuff World's pink fluorescent paint. And we're focusing on the central areas and leaving the outer edges and the bottom a little bit, still that white primer showing. You can give it a second coat to darken it up a little bit, so it's a little light still, so I'm just going to go in the center, and you can kind of see making that a little bit more vibrant with a second coat. Now we're going to darken down the outer edges by using Fluoro Violet. So we're going to put it in the white areas that we left, and also feather it into the pink areas, so create a little bit of a transition. All the outer edges, the bottom, they're all getting this color, just to give it a little bit of visual interest and transition. And again, we're using the semi-transparent nature of these paints to help feather it into the other color. And don't forget to go along the very outside edge. There's a little bit of a lip around the edge there that you need to catch. Next we have Fluoro Blue, and this is not as stark in reality as it shows up in the video, but the blue paint is somewhat transparent, and it's just helped darkening down that violet paint. Again, we want to make the tips just a little bit more dark. And I feel like I overdid it with the purple, so I'm just going in with the rose and kind of creating transitions out and making it look a little bit more pink, transitioning into the purple. Since these paints are transparent, we want to brighten up the areas that aren't going to be pink, so I'm just going in with white ink into all the areas that I want to be a different color. So the orb in the center and this energy swirl at the bottom, I'm just lightening up with white ink. And next up, I'm going in with the actual brush, and it's a mixture of Viejo surface primer and black ink. The primer helps coverage, the ink helps it flow, and we're just painting that outer rim black. You don't have to worry about all the little lines going in towards the center. We're going to deal with them later. You just want this fat outer rim part painted black. I'm using a big filbert brush here. You might want a skinnier brush too when you get closer to the edge. All right, now we're going to paint the glow. So we're going to start again with the brightest color. So we're going to start with yellow. And we're just in the center of that orb, we're making it yellow, and we also want to do the center of the bottom orb along with some of the energy beams coming down. If I were to redo this, I might skip this step, but next I use Fluoro Yellow Orange and just darken down around the edges of the orb and add a little bit more on the lightning. It's very subtle, it's hard to see what I'm doing here. If I were to redo this, I would have just skipped this step and went straight to the orange and skipped the yellow orange. The airbrush can give me the transition I need between the colors, but this is what I did for this miniature. You can see it's very subtle transition. I'm going to do the same thing to the bottom. Next up, we're going to use floral orange, and again, darken down around the edges of that orb. We're going to get a little bit of overspray onto the pink areas, but that is okay. It's just going to look like a little bit of a glow. We're also working on the bottom. You want to leave the very bottom of the energy white still for our next step, but most of this is going to get covered in this orange color. And we're going to go back in with the pink color we've used several times, Floral Rose. And the very bottom of the energy is going to get this. And we're also going to put it in the darkest recesses. I use dark here lightly because it's a glow. If you don't know how transparent pink interacts with yellow, it often just creates a vibrant orange. And we're kind of using that to our advantage here, just to create a nice bright orange in the deepest parts of the orb. Now I'm working on the base. I'm not completely happy with how this base came out, but here's what I did. We're using fluorescent lime all around the outer rim of the base here. And now we're going in with actually a paint that's not from Green Stuff World. This is Golden Acrylics High Flow paint, fluorescent blue. It's a little bit lighter than the Green Stuff World blue, and I wanted something a little bit brighter here. And lastly, we're just going to go in with Floral Violet and darken in the inner parts. If you're wondering what this base is, it's something I designed and 3D printed out just to give it a little bit of a techno feel. Alright, if you watch my videos, you know I love my oil paints. We're just going to go in with black oil paint, thin down with mineral spirits. And if we have the right consistency, it's just going to flow nicely in all those recesses. We just can kind of tap the brush and the paint should flow. Like right here, if you watch, that paint just flows all the way up that line. And that's why I was saying we could skip those inner lines earlier, because we're painting it with this method. You just want to go around all the cracks, all the inner lines with that. What you can also do is with pure mineral spirits, you can kind of clean up any mistakes. So any overspill, just put some pure mineral spirits on the brush and clean those up. Alright, now that that's done, we're going to go to the black areas and we're going to do edge highlights. So if you watch any of my videos, this is how I normally do black. It's broken edge highlights. The first paint we're using is Graveyard Denim from P3. It's very similar to the Fang from Games Workshop if you use those paints. So you can kind of see what I'm doing here. I'm just going along the edge, making broken lines to make this look more weathered. Don't ask me how it's bright neon and also weathered at the same time. Works in my head. Just carry along all the edges of the black like this. You can use the side of the brush to help you out. And we're going to repeat that process, this time with Troll Blood Highlight, which is, again, if you're using Games Workshop paints, it's similar to Pallid Witch Flesh. So again, we're using these broken edge highlights. We want to reinforce what we did in the last step, and you can see I'm using this side of the brush because all of these sharp edges, it's just an easy way to get a nice fine line on them. So instead of drawing straight line down the whole edge, you kind of draw small lines and dots. It helps the piece look really weathered. If you take your time here, you'll really get a cool effect. Make sure you have a nice tip on your brush when you go across the lines that aren't sharp edges and you have to actually draw fine dots and lines. Alright, now with a mix of white paint and the fluorescent yellow, I'm adding dots into the center of the orb, and then I'm going to clean my brush off a little bit and blend it out again in that dotting motion. We're just trying to create a hot spot in the center of that orb. I'm using an artist white paint here, but any white paint will do. You just want to mix something with that fluorescent paint to give it a little bit more coverage. So just keep on going back and forth between kind of dotting paint on and then feathering it out with a clean brush. Again, we want to keep using these dotting motion to create somewhat of an energy effect. Do the same thing on the bottom. You can kind of draw a little bit lines to highlight those energy strands. Next up, we're going to just use the pure fluorescent yellow paint and kind of blend out what we did in the last step a little bit more to just make a little bit better of a transition. So this is, again, the fluorescent paints on their own are very transparent. So this is going to help blend those two things together. We're using that dotting motion. And for the final step of the orb, I'm using pure white paint. And again, just some fine dots right in the middle. Again, trying to create that bright spot of energy. We're going to repeat this on the bottom energy strands as well. Kind of highlighting the sharp edges. Alright, now we're going to highlight the pink areas. We have a mix of white and our fluorescent pink paint, the fluorescent rose. And we're doing the same thing we did on the black. We're doing those broken edge highlights. Just move around. This is going to stand out more on the parts that are the darker purple color than it is the middle pink parts. But just do it on everything. Some parts will look more subtle than others, but that's okay. Again, I don't know why it's going to be weathered and neon colored, but works in my head. So you can use the side of the brush just as long as you're careful on the sharp edges. Just kind of dot along the edge, creating that broken edge highlight. You're going to do the bottom parts of all the cracks, the bottom of the breaks in the stone, and then I just went around the entire edge of the stone. And we're going to further refine the last step. This time we just added more white to our previous mix, so it's mostly white now, and doing the same thing. So this is going to help it stand out a little bit more on the parts that are pinker towards the center. You want to catch that sharp ridge around that energy orb. And again, we want kind of the bottom edge of the breaks in the stone and the bottom edge of the cracks here. We're just reinforcing what we did in the last step, adding some further highlights and texture to those edges to make them look weathered. And after that, you're pretty much done the main body. We're going to move on to the base. Like I said, I'm not happy with the base completely, but almost the same process we were just doing, except it's a mix of titanium white and the fluoro blue. And we're just going around the edges of those hexagonal shapes. Not necessarily around the whole edge, but just highlighting certain parts of it. And then we're going to repeat the process with, again, the mix of white and yellow we used earlier on the greener parts, and also as highlights on the blue parts as well, to further kind of create some brighter spots. After this, I'm going to paint that part in the center, which I was trying to make look like the energy had ripped up part of it as it pulled across it. I'm not fully happy with the effect. I'm going to show you what I did and explain how I think I'm going to fix it. So you can kind of see that part's painted black, and what I'm doing here is I'm dry brushing it with an orange. This is not the fluorescent orange. You can use any orange paint. The fluorescent orange won't dry brush well. And then I'm going to repeat the process with yellow. This was not the way to go about this, because what I want this to look like is the energy beam came across and tore up and burnt up the ground. So the way I should have done this was have it white, and when I had the airbrush out, airbrush in the yellow and orange colors, and then dry brush the black over top to kind of look like the underneath part is burning where there's the embers on top. I think I'm going to go back and redo this. That way, I'll post some pictures up on my socials once that's done. But right here, it was black, and again, dry brushing the other colors over top. So here is the final effect. You can kind of see they're nice and bright, but they also look beaten and worn, which is kind of how I do most of my stuff. And if you look under the black light, you can see how it shines. There's some kind of darker areas where the white paint is not reflecting. I should have added the fluorescent white that I have into the white, but I like the overall effect. It looks pretty cool. I'm very happy with how these came out. I hope you found that useful. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And if you want to see me paint the rest of this kit, so the big throne, the Triarchs, and Szerekh himself, who I may or may not have some sort of 80s property in mind when I paint it. But if you want to see that whole process, let me know in the comments below and I'll release some videos for that too. Also, if you picked up this kit, let me know how you're planning on painting it. Are you doing something crazy out of the box like me too, or are you going more traditional? Please subscribe for more videos, and until next time, keep on gaming and paint your minis.